So Peter, the Lucid Air is an amazing vehicle. It is an expensive vehicle. Like many EV startups, you're entering the market at the luxury price point, and that's not by accident. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
It's entirely by design. First of all, we set out to create a technological tour de force and to define the brand, because we're building a new brand. So it's a well established course of business to start with a high-end product, and then you can work your way down through different strata of the market. But also there's a financial imperative at work. It actually paradoxically costs more to industrialize a low-end product than a high-end product. So it's the cost of the car is kind of inversely proportional to the cost of the factory. If you're building a Rolls-Royce, it's a tiny factory because not many people can afford them, and they're largely hand-built. If you're building a Volkswagen Golf, that's a car for the masses. It's a numbers game. Costs billions to robotize a factory. So it makes sense, start high, work your way down, establish the brand, but most of all, create a technological tour de force, a landmark first product.
Got it. So you've got a lot of competitors now. There was a time when EVs were were a minority, but now most major automakers are in the market. You've described the sort of 3 stages of Zen for automakers moving into the EV market. Can you run through those?
Well, most of them are trying. Some of them are getting there. I think that, if you asked your average traditional car company CEO a few years ago, they might begrudgingly accept that battery electric's going to happen sometime in the future. But I think there's a general realization, first stage, EV is the future, battery electric is the future. Most have cottoned on there's not going to be hydrogen. Some are still living that fantasy. But it's battery electric, I think, is well known to be the future for mankind's mass mobility. So on the second sort of realization I think many of them have had only more recently is, in order to achieve a competitive electric car, you can't really share a platform with a gasoline car and make an EV derivative of it. Some have tried. It's very, very tough. If you look at the landmark EVs, Tesla Model S, designed from the ground up as a pure battery electric, there was never going to be anything else. The same with Lucid Air. Through and through, it could never be shared platform with the gasoline. But there is kind of a third stage of Zen, which I think you're alluding to here. And I don't think, I think hardly anyone's got to this yet. I mean, for us at Lucid, it never was just jumping on an EV bandwagon. That's never what I wanted to do. It's imperative for the planet, for attenuation of global warming, to get mass adoption of sustainable mobility of battery electric cars. And the way that's going to happen is to fuel this tech race. It was to innovate with core technology which truly differentiates. That's what Lucid's always been about. Cut us to the core, an engineering-led company. And I don't think that the traditional car companies get that yet. They look at a commoditized derivative of the EV, buying things off the shelf. I'll get a motor from here, I'll get an inverter from there, I'll get someone to do these battery packs. We do it all in-house, we're totally vertically integrated. And I mean, Tesla does that, Lucid does that, and we're the only two that I'm aware of, and we've entered this tech race. And why that is important is because we need to increase the efficiency. We need to go further miles with less battery pack. Long range is not about just endowing a car with a humongous battery pack. It's about getting efficiency to go further with smaller battery pack, and that way we'll be able to create this revolution in transportation with a minimal impact upon the world's precious resources, the minimal number of lithium mines, the minimal use of cobalt and materials like nickel.
Let's talk about that, because I saw you speak at South by Southwest. You introduced me to the concept of the gas-guzzling EV. Yeah. And I was like, that's a great line. And I'm happy to reference it here. But to explain what that means, because it really goes to the efficiency point.
Yeah. I should say it really is more the electron guzzler, isn't it, rather than the gas guzzler. Yeah. It's kind of a misnomer. So, I mean, there's this perception, the world is binary, right? It's like fruit's bad, chocolate's good, right? There's this perception gasoline cars are bad and all electric cars are good, right? They're good for the environment. It's far more nuanced than that. I mean, some of the gasoline cars are pretty good with lean burn technology and have a much less devastating impact than others. And it's the same for electric cars. And there's a very simple metric here which really defines not just the environmental impacts of that electric car, but also is a metric I would convey that defines the level of an EV car company's technological prowess, and that is how far you can go in miles per kilowatt hour. Miles per kilowatt hour, it's the new gas mileage, right? It's not miles per gallon anymore, it's miles per kilowatt hour. And fortunately, there's almost an easy way of remembering it. It's about 1/10. We can do 4.6 miles per kilowatt hour with our Lucid Air Grand Touring, and that's really exceptional, as would, say, a 46 miles per gallon gasoline car. And a really bad gasoline car be about 16 miles to the gallon, and some EVs get about 1.6 miles per kilowatt hour. So there's the whole spectrum, and what I'm really a proponent of is accelerating this race towards more efficiency, because that means we can make electric cars with smaller battery packs, and that is the big ticket item in the cost of making an EV, right, is the battery pack. A battery pack for a front-running electric car today can cost in excess of $20,000, in the 20,000s. That's not to the customer, that's to the manufacturer to put in the car. So how on earth, if the pack alone is costing $25,000, how on earth are you ever going to make a car that the masses could contemplating affording at around $30,000? We've got to drive that battery pack size down, and that will come through efficiency, through high technology, and that is what Lucid's totally committed to.
You've also made the point that by making the battery pack smaller, you fundamentally change the driver's relationship with the vehicle.
Oh, totally, totally. So this is this really interesting thing. People think, oh, why are you chasing an efficient EV, Peter? Well, they're already incredibly efficient. But that's kind of the old gasoline paradigm. Because if you've got an efficient gasoline car, you win at the gas pump. You don't have to put so much gas in. It doesn't cost you. It affects your pocket, right? So that's really the only advantage of having an efficient gasoline car. Probably they suck in terms of performance, but you pay less at the pump. But an efficient electric car is totally transformative. It means you can have more range, you can have less weight because you've got a smaller battery pack, you can have more comfy seating position because, as with our Touring and Pure models, which we're about to launch tomorrow in an event in Los Angeles, we all see that we have a footwell cut out because the battery pack is smaller, so they're actually more comfortable as a family car, as a riding experience. They're lighter, so they're more lithe and agile, more fun to drive. The whole car is better if it's efficient, whereas a gasoline car just costs you less at the pump. And of course, remember, in terms of environmental credentials, our car can do 4.6 miles per kilowatt hour. Some EVs out there, 2.3. We're using half of the world's resources, half of, it depends how the energy is generated, but with a mix of traditional and sustainable generation, we're creating half the CO2 impact from per mile of our EV compared with others.
So speaking of rare earth metals and the way these batteries are made, making manufacturing vehicles over the course of the last 12 months with the war in Ukraine, our challenges with China, a lot of those minerals are coming from there. How has the market been just getting supplies?
Dan, it's been profoundly challenging. Well, we were launching a new car company, a new car with a clear vision of creating the best technology in the world in-house, manufacturing that in-house, starting this whole thing up against a backdrop of post-COVID supply chain, international supply chain disruption, and developing our own processes internally. It's been an alignment of stars. But look, I've got a brilliant team around me. I've been in the factory these last few months, personally leading the ramp up of what I think is the finest car in the world. And the team in Arizona, we built our own factory in Arizona. There's huge huge amount of Arizona pride linked to creating this car to a fabulous quality, and hats off to all of them.
But I mean, even just the price of nickel over the course of the last 12 months it's just been extraordinary. Is there, from an engineering perspective, there's really no way around that given the battery technology we have today.
Well, again, efficiency, because if you can go twice as far per kilowatt hour, you can have a competitive range with half the battery size, so you need half the amount of nickel. But nickel, actually, the nickel prices are looking like they've just peaked and coming down the last 6 weeks. So there is hope. On the nickel horizon, at least.
Right. There's also a massive stimulus package, which we don't call it the stimulus package. I think we call it the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes.
But $7.5 billion going into electric charging stations across the country.
It's wonderful.
Is that an appropriate amount of money? Is it excessive? Is it not enough?
What I would say is it's great. I applaud any move to really cement the US's position here. We've got two of the highest tech car companies, EV companies on the planet, based here in California, and it's great to see the US government rise to really take note of the need to develop this arena. What I would point to is a couple of things. I think there's almost a myopia towards DC fast charging. I think there's something deep in the American psyche I've learned from my days here that there's this mythical road trip, and people think in terms of there's a road trip every week. I believe it does happen occasionally, but it seems to have got a disproportionate impact upon buyers' psychology, I must confess. I think that when you think 95% of charging is done at home overnight, and a lot of people don't have access to overnight AC chargers, I think that's a really important part of the landscape, and I look to some sort of government support for that in their thinking. The other thing is I'm a great proponent, as you already have gathered, on high-tech, technology-developed EVs. Not all EVs are born equal. So why don't we incentivize the uptake of the high-tech, non-electron guzzling EVs rather than just based upon the price point of that car? So that's my sort of message to the Hill.
That's a great point. Most of the rebates and most of the incentive programs, they have no impact on the efficiency of the vehicle.
Yeah.
It's just if it's electric, you get this money.
I mean, you could take the sort of analogy 100 years back when everyone was riding horses, and maybe the government wanted to incentivize the transition to gasoline cars. What would you want to do? Incentivize the cheapest gasoline car, or would you want to incentivize the most efficient? You could have the cheapest gas guzzling car. That's not a good thing to be incentivizing. So, I mean, I would say that because we've got the most efficient car on the planet, wouldn't I? You would.
You're playing it to your hand. But it's interesting to think about. There was a time when electric vehicles and gas vehicles were competing against each other.
Oh, there was.
Both on the market, and EVs were actually ahead for a good period of that time. If there had been some intervention, if there had been a little finger on the scale, the whole auto industry could have gone a different direction very early on.
It's a fascinating sort of historical cameo. Maybe some of the audience is aware that actually it was the advent of the electric starter motor that made gasoline cars easier to start, that actually put the gasoline car in that ascendant position. But the fastest car in the world, the land speed record, was held by a gentleman called Camille Genetzi, an electric car, over 100 years ago, and it looked like EVs were going to be the future. Well, 100 years on, we've come full circle.
Very good. Before you go, I think we're going to, on a non-EV note, you've worked with Elon Musk in the past.
Yeah, very closely. Yeah.
Very closely. He is now obviously still running 5 companies, but one of them is Twitter. Yeah. Do you have any advice for his new employees, those that are left?
Well, I had an unusual relationship because most people say that he drives them. I worked very closely with him for 3 years when I was chief engineer on Model S. And I felt that we had a wonderful opportunity. Model S was my passion. And I drove myself. I worked harder than anyone to make that car what it is. My passion was to really contribute something that the planet needs through EV technology. And that again is my mission with Lucid. It's history repeated. There's no peace for the wicked, I guess. But that's what drives me today, that same drive, that same passion, because I believe this is a technology race. And make no mistake, it's advanced EV technology that we're creating here in the US today that's going to have a profound impact for the benefit of all mankind and save the planet.
I mean, I don't know that there's a lot of advice for Twitter employees in there, but it was well answered nonetheless. Perhaps a bit of a dodge. Peter, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Thanks.